The very worst thing that anyone can do in the House of Commons, believe it or not, is to suggest or even hint that an MP is lying. If you do that and you do not apologize immediately, the Speaker will throw you out of the House. And the reason why it's such a no-no is because members of Parliament are such upstanding members of society, they would never intentionally lie to the House. Meanwhile, back on planet Earth, we know better. Last month, Tory MP Brad Butt stood in the House and said that he witnessed widespread voter fraud in his riding. He saw it. He saw as rival campaign workers plucked voter ID cards out of the blue bins and then used them to commit voter fraud. He used the phrase, "I saw and I witnessed" 5 separate times. Shocking allegations, except a complete lie. He just made it up to make his government's legislation look better. He just made it up. Bear in mind, MPs, they take an oath of allegiance before they take their seat in the House of Commons. And it's serious. It's like being on the stand, swearing on your mother's grave, and a double pinky swear, all wrapped up in one. In the real world, if you're caught lying, there are consequences. You do it in court, you go to jail. You do it on the job, you get fired. A 7-year-old understands this. They may not get fired, but they would get a timeout, but not Brad. Oh no, all Brad had to do was stand up and, like a sulking adolescent, say, "I did not mean to mislead the House." Ironically, he said this in the House. Another lie in the House. I have to believe in my heart of hearts that MPs, most of them, would not intentionally lie, but it is getting harder and harder to be shocked when they do, because without consequences, the House is becoming more and more common and less honorable every day.
Yeah, leave that. Hi there, I'm Darren Howard.
And I'm Robert Nisbet.
We're off angle today.
Yes, because we're on shaky ground politically.
So, in the next part, we're going to balance this out, but you know what? We're not corporate radio. We really don't care. We're here to talk about the Conservatives. Brad Butt lying the way that he is. It's very interesting. Go ahead.
Well, you know, they were talking about how serious voter fraud is in the House of Commons.
But there's no voter fraud.
Well, except on the part of the Conservatives.
Well, yeah, the Conservatives lie when they're talking about voting all the time, and we're here to talk about them. This is Video Radio, where we take mainstream media and we get rid of all the crap and get you the straight information.
Here's some information on some new legislation that the Harper Conservatives are trying to introduce to Elections Canada.
A bill that we're bringing forward.
You'd be hard-pressed to find a more controversial piece of proposed legislation this year than the Fair Elections Act. Critics say it's anything but.
The only reason they're doing this is to stack the deck for the next election.
The crux of the criticism is that the act won't do anything to get out the vote and could even hurt it. People will no longer be able to use vouching to vote. That's when someone else vouches for your identity because you don't have ID. And the chief electoral officer will no longer be able to even talk about why to vote, just how and where. The concern comes at a time when less and less people are voting. Just 39% of eligible youth voters cast a ballot in the last election.
Imagine if we only had 39% of young people graduating from high school, it would be considered a crisis. So I think overall, we could definitely strengthen the act if we did more to focus on how we could encourage and motivate more turnout.
Students make up a large portion of the estimated 120,000 people who used vouching in 2011. So do seniors and the disabled. Adam Shedletsky started a petition to convince Ottawa to rethink the changes at the ballot box. 56,000 people have signed it.
Canadians are suspicious, and rightly so in this circumstance.
But the government says there's no reason to be. Not only would the act strengthen penalties against people who violate elections laws, but the government says doing away with vouching is all in an effort to eliminate the possibility of fraud. And the Conservatives say that possibility is there.
50,000 such irregularities in the last election related to vouching, according to Elections Canada's own report.
But it's falling on deaf ears. The opposition says the Conservatives are just trying to marginalize people who wouldn't have voted for them in the first place.
This wouldn't have been done if not for the fact that this will benefit the Conservatives.
Vashi Kapelos, Global News, Ottawa.
So there isn't anywhere you can look in the Canadian political landscape where you don't see the Conservatives on the attack against a Canadian democratic institution. They mean to delegitimize all these institutions in the eyes of Canadians so that Canadians walk away and no longer defend those institutions. When that happens, the Conservatives will rule forever.
Do you think that, sorry, Bob, do you think that's their, like, what's their
I
ultimate
think
goal?
that's the strategy. Make sure that the Canadian polity, civil society simply walks away from its democratic institutions in disgust and defeat. Then those institutions get to exist, technically, but they're adrift in the Canadian polity's mind. They just don't mean democracy in the mind of Canadians, right?
Because people have walked away from
Because people have walked away in disgust, in contempt, in all that stuff. So what Canadians can do is refuse to give up on their democratic institutions. Refuse to give up. Just don't get sucked into the idea that we need to abolish the Senate. We need a Senate, by the way. The Prime Minister shouldn't appoint senators. Something Harper again said he would never do, right? He's appointed 30-something.
Yes. No,
well, you know what gets me is that, according to their own legislation, the party should be deregistered.
Yes.
And I think that if Canadians get that message, that we need to push that and hang them by their own petard.
So I really think, that the view of the Conservative Party of Canada is that the nation is simply a storefront, and that the public institutions of the nation are their job is to stand guard in the streets, while the Conservative apparatchiks and their friends do smash and grabs all over the country for whatever the country's worth. It seems like they think the nation is just a storefront and that they should have their own policemen standing in the streets making sure they get a chance to take whatever they want. I mean, it's truly frightening.
So is there any, what can Canadians do now? Can they
never vote for the Conservatives again?
So we're out here in beautiful Kelowna, British Columbia, where the Unfair Elections Act has really reared its ugly head in an agenda. An obvious agenda.
It's all part of disenfranchising us from democracy.
Okay, they don't want democracy. They don't want an informed public. It's why they muzzled all the sciences. They ended the long-form census form.
And they're stacking the deck.
And they're making sure that the people who would benefit the most from a democracy don't have a chance to vote.
It just doesn't seem like they're taking a page out of the Republicans' notebook down in the States, where they're talking about voter fraud that doesn't exist.
I know. Brad Butt, of course, they're all apologizing for Brad Butt, saying, well, he said he was sorry. That makes it okay.
Yeah, but there's no consequences when you lie in the House of Commons.
No, never. And actually, we're seeing that they get away with this. We can talk about proroguing. We can talk about the fact that they lied about the cost of military planes that we're still sending money into. Most people don't know that.
But I just think it's hilarious that they're talking about election fraud when they're the past masters at it.
Yeah, I know. And, of course, a fraudulent government is exactly what we have. And they're leaving right now. Rats are leaving the ship. Flaherty, Jim Flaherty, is that right?
Jim Flaherty, yeah.
Jim Flaherty just resigned from one of the prime posts in the Canadian government.
And of course, the factually challenged Joe Oliver has been appointed as our new finance minister.
Okay, keep grinning while you watch these.
Peter, there's no way around it. Jim Flaherty's exit was much anticipated, but it is very sudden and leaves a big hole in the government.
We will not only balance the budget in 2015, we will achieve a surplus.
Flaherty embodied the government's claim to sound economic management. He was the only minister that Stephen Harper never shuffled, and he got the credit for a steady hand when the recession hit. Flaherty said that he would keep at it until the budget was balanced, which his budget last month effectively was. But he refused to say so until there's a bigger surplus. Flaherty also publicly disagreed with a Tory election promise, income splitting.
I think income splitting needs a long, hard, analytical look.
But days later, the Prime Minister reaffirmed the policy, and now he has to replace his key minister.
The leading criteria will be who will be controllable by the Prime Minister and by the PMO.
Now, in a statement, the Prime Minister said he accepted the resignation with great reluctance. As for Jim Flaherty, he's obviously well placed to make some serious money in the private sector, but he hasn't said just where he is going, Peter.
First of all, on a purely personal note, I was the finance critic for the NDP through 6 budget cycles with Jim Flaherty. Always a gentleman. very good sense of humor, very determined individual. We had very different views as to the best solutions for the Canadian economy, but I have nothing but nice things to say about him as an individual. So I wish him well. My wife Catherine and I wish him and his family well. But that leads us to today's appointment and today's disappointment, which is the nomination of Joe Oliver. All you have to do is go back through recent statements by Joe Oliver to realize what a mistake this nomination is. His statements on First Nations, as one of the chiefs said, go beyond paternalism. They were tinted with racism. His statements on global warming are an embarrassment to Canada. He attacked a very respected NASA scientist, saying that his figures were wrong, but was never capable of saying what was wrong with the figures. He's gone on to say that anybody who asks questions about the environmental record of his government, who dares question or want to have proper information about an energy project, as far as he's concerned, is a foreign-funded radical. That's not the type of person who should be overseeing our economy in Canada. Joe Oliver's information on global warming has consistently proven to be fanciful. He says offhand that scientists now believe that a 2-degree increase in the temperature of the Earth is not a big problem, but he's never capable of saying who any of those scientists are. So Joe Oliver has a record of making things up, of insulting people from environmentalists to First Nations, and frankly, his appointment is an embarrassment to Canada.
So what do you think?
Well, I think that perhaps Joe Oliver may be an embarrassment for Canada on the world stage, but I guess he can't be any worse than whoever's in charge of the Treasury down in the States.
And Jim Baird, well, there's an embarrassment.
John Baird, yeah, let's not even go there.
He's the only guy who wasn't applauded, wasn't welcome to the UN, and he's the guy representing us. Of course, stances, just unilateral stances on Israel, destroying the environment, making sure that we have mass poverty, and ignoring all those problems.
But he does seem to be a very good yes man for Harper.
Wonder where those lips have been glued. Well, we tried to get the lever that would move the world to get some of the caucus members off of Harper's butt.
In our next segment, we'll be talking more about what the Harper government has been up to. That's not being reported on that extensively.
We're going to be coming back with Rick Mercer right after these.
Channel 4's local weather report with meteorologist Lee Bixby.
Good morning, St. Louis. Let's go ahead and take a look at your week. 113, Tuesday 114. The crops and livestock out in Hasbro County are pretty much and so are we in terms of grocery store prices. Later in the week, it's going to cool down to a scorching 109 degrees, but the weekend, holy 117 degrees. Well, it's going to be a little toasty out there in the ball field, and just imagine how toasty your own balls are going to feel.
Dirty Energy has created a world of dirty weather. On November 14th, learn the full truth about dirty weather. Don't miss 24 hours of reality. The Dirty Weather Report.
This morning, there is an uproar in a suburban Philadelphia school district over privacy and security. School officials are accused of using webcams to find out what their students are doing at home. CBS News correspondent Michelle Miller has the story.
All 2,300 high school students in the Lower Merion School District have one, and every school-issued Apple laptop is equipped with a webcam capable of remote activation.
Everybody's pretty disgusted.
They're disgusted by accusations in a federal lawsuit claiming school administrators used that device to spy on a student in the privacy of his own home.
I just received an email from my daughter who's very upset saying, "Mom, I have that laptop open all the time in my bedroom, even when I'm changing."
The Lower Merion School District says the webcams are only activated to track lost or stolen laptops. The parents of Blake Robbins aren't talking yet, but in court papers filed Wednesday, they claim a school official activated the webcam last year for a different purpose, suspecting the Harriton High School sophomore was engaged in improper behavior at home. He was later confronted with a photograph allegedly taken as evidence. Privacy advocates are in an uproar.
This definitely was not a safe or secure or even a rational thing for the school to be engaged in, if in fact this is what they did.
But for those familiar with the Orwellian term Big Brother,
we read 1984 this year.
If the claims are true, the damage is done. Michelle Miller, CBS News, Penn Valley, Pennsylvania.